Okay, so we are continuing on here in our discussion about religious experience. And so, where I ended last class, I was talking about asceticism, how that is something that shows up in the history of religion. And we do find this idea develops both West and East, first in the West with the Greeks and then over in India. The idea that very much polarizes the physical and the spiritual, and and this gets highlighted in certain aspects of religion, in certain traditions, that you need to transcend physicality altogether, and that in fact this world of matter is actually evil. And that is, again, a particular strain of thought that we'll find that begins amongst the Greeks. It shows up a little bit in the history of Christianity here and there. There'll be some divisions on that. But it does, and it's definitely there in Gnosticism and in certain circles there. Then in the East and India, it becomes quite strong in certain aspects of Hinduism. So you get this kind of duality that matter is evil and spirit is good, and the ultimate goal is total transcendence of the physical plane and earthly realms. Anyways, so there are those who will take that to the extreme in the history of religion. However, it does, as I mentioned last time, have a valid point of making sure you don't meet spiritual needs through material means, right? Which is where I ended last time. Now, having said that, we do find that ascetic type of practices are also very common in more primal religions, in the sense of various techniques that may inflict pain and physical hardship as a way of inducing an altered state of consciousness, and that is a way of invoking and evoking, I should say, evoking different kinds of experiences. And so that's what we're going to look at here next, is some of these. And so we do find that in more primal traditions, there's a greater emphasis on evoking ecstatic type experiences, more dramatic in nature, where people are really kind of overtaken somehow. It could be through, that even in terms of what they speak is like a type of spirit possession, through certain forms of movement, that they're being influenced by other forces or spirits or personas in various ways. And so we'll find this, say things like walking on fire, bodily flagellation here, like body piercing. We'll see some pictures of that, all to kind of attain particular kind of trance states. And so things were more extreme in the past. And that's why I sort of emphasize religion today has become quite domesticated, where we don't do these sorts of extreme things. But examples, going into trance, it was quite common, where you literally kind of lose self-awareness, somewhat unconscious, but somewhat aware, but also somewhat unconscious. There's a sense of total surrender and a radical shift in consciousness. Bodily movements can be involuntary or weakly controlled. This can happen, spontaneously or be induced, but oftentimes there are techniques to induce these. And here you can see it's through a pretty dramatic body piercing that takes place. And you can see with his eyes, they're all white, rolled back, that he's obviously in a trance state. Where am I? Yeah. And so with us can be associated sort of possession type experiences of another kind of entity, persona coming through. You see this in forms of channeling, mediumship, like a spirit guide. It could be angel, dead ancestor, or spirit, deity, demon, whatever. These sorts of things happening. So, in more modern day language, they often refer to as entity attachments. There are forms of spirit release therapy. In the past, we call them exorcisms, but a sense of spirit intrusion, and this can entail space clearing, ghost busting. So these sort of aspects come in the history of religion. But in terms of methods to induce altered states, there are basic categories of them, okay? And so first of all, you can have repetitive monotonous stimulation is a key technique that is used. And this could be brought about through repetitive movements like drumming or using a rattle. So it's just a monotonous kind of stimulation through sound. That can also be evoked through chanting, whereas both sound is also your voice, always chanting a mantra over and over and over. It also could be induced in certain ways through singing and music, and that's somehow more repetitive in nature, that these can have an effect. Whoops, it goes so fast here. So that's sort of repetitive stimulation. Then there's overstimulation, where your sensory system is overloaded, like it's such intense stimulation. And what's very common here is through physical pain. So make sure you can see all the pictures here. So you'll see body piercing is really quite common in a lot of more indigenous sort of traditions, literally hooking the body, piercing it in all kinds of ways throughout the body, and really quite dramatic. Like, that's pretty intense there with the piercing of those, I don't know, they sort of look like pineapples going right through the mouth in a large way. And as you can see, the woman here in the middle, how her eye also is, she's obviously entranced through this. And I saw a video, it was one available at UBC that I had shown in class way back then, where some doctors went over to India to study some of these people. And they noted that by going into a certain trance state, it would shut down a part of the brain that makes you sensitive to pain. And it just literally shuts that part of the brain down when you kind of induce a certain trance state. That was, quite interesting. Whoops, where am I here? Oh yeah, and I should say with repetitive, even, well, anyways. So overstimulation, other forms, dancing, and this is very common, in more indigenous traditions, the forms of dance, like trance dance. You have the music going that's quite repetitive, and then you just dance, dance, dance nonstop, and sometimes even for days, in order to evoke a type of trance state is, again, very common ancient practice. Fire walking has been done all over the world. And they can be literally very dramatic forms of firewalking, not what you get today in a Tony Robbins seminar or in some personal growth seminars. It's sort of quite a different ball game here. Pretty intense experiences that, there's eyewitnesses to these things. And, here are some pictures. But they literally walk through pretty major forms of fire, not just, some simmering coals that aren't really all that hot anymore. Then you also have understimulation. This is also a very common technique for inducing an altered state. And that involves all kinds of things, from food deprivation through fasting, sleep deprivation, being in isolation and in darkness, like being in a cave meditating for days on end. And then, of course, meditation itself is a form of just, again, blocking out any kind of stimulation coming in. Okay. So these are very common in the history of religion, these various techniques to have an effect on your consciousness and evoke your awareness of other dimensions of reality, in a sense. And more contemporary aspect is shamanic type of breath work. It's become presented as being shamanic, but it's something really more. There are traditions like this. You'll see this amongst Hindu yogis doing breathing techniques as sort of certain practices within certain schools of yoga. To hold the breath, long, slow breathing, all kinds of different ways of doing it. And so in more recent times, people are doing breath work. It got popularized in the 70s through the recalled at first as rebirthing, and then Stanislav Grof called it holotropic breathing, and then others call it transformational breath work, where you basically kind of almost like hyperventilate, and it induces a bit of an altered state, and will usually it's used for bringing up things that are buried in the subconscious, but then it can also go beyond that to deeper levels. I'll maybe talk about that separately in another video, some aspects of that. So that was something more contemporary. However, something that is ancient and indeed universal, and many would argue that this could be indeed the beginnings of people having religious or spiritual experiences, really opening up the door to that, is the use of psychoactive substances, a form of chemical stimulation, through ingesting certain plants of various kinds. It could be certain mushrooms or various plants that have been used that indeed have an impact on one's consciousness that shifts it in such a way that you then perceive different dimensions and levels of reality. Okay, this is very important. I'm going to do a whole separate little video on this. Okay, but that's universal and, again, ancient evidence of that throughout the world. Whoops, where am I here? Oh no, it goes way too fast. Hang on here. Okay, so just to sum up this little part here, is that ecstatic experiences really are quite central to the more ancient primal traditions. Entering into these ecstatic kind of states was central. It's sort of the religious experience, sort of the beginnings of things. And from there, religion evolves and how they get induced. I guess what I like to use the term, they become a bit more domesticated and controlled in terms of particular practices such as meditation and prayer and the use of ritual and whatnot, right? Whereas in the beginning, they tend to be induced in more radical kind of ways involving really intense experiences. You know, if it be body piercing, fire walking, and what have you, right? And now in more established religions, these more ecstatic kind of states are generally frowned upon. They're often shunned to the side, even in some respects, sometimes even demonized in the sense that they're evil or they're dangerous. And so religious authorities tend to want to control the kinds of experiences that people can have or how they go about inducing them. Okay. And so sometimes, in a sense, here is where religion can become a bit of an obstacle for people in times for having spiritual experiences, because they kind of want to control and hinder them. And they can also, in a way, sometimes inoculate you against them. You get so conditioned to sort of habitual kind of religiosity that it almost becomes a crust that you have to break through to actually have a spiritual experience. Anyways, primal religions emphasize participation in pretty elaborate rituals that it wasn't about watching rituals or just being more of a passive actor in those rituals. They were intense, of, doing like a trance dance for days on end, all right, until you literally collapsed going into a trance state. Or, body piercing and fasting and freezing in a cave in the dark for days on end. These would be really intense things that you would participate in. Okay. Whereas, again, with established religions, it's much more domesticated and controlled, highly formalized, generally non-ecstatic. Sometimes even, dancing is prohibited. Music sometimes can even be seen as dangerous. The last thing they would want is for you to enter into any kind of an altered state, right? That is sort of what characterizes more recent, well, somewhat recent, official established religions compared to the primal. Okay, so now I just want to take a look at a few theorists, just to give you a bit of an introduction to some people that had been influential in writing regarding aspects of religious experience. And just to highlight a few. Walter Stace, he wrote some books back then emphasizing that there are two different types of mystical experiences, what he called introvertive versus extrovertive. And the introvertive is more of what you would call non-theistic, where there's just an awareness of pure beingness, pure consciousness. It's just more of an isness behind things. There's no me, there's no you, there's no divine, there's no world out there. It's just pure beingness. He called that introvertive mystical experience. And then there's extrovertive mystical experience, a perception of how the unity behind all things, that everything is one, that everything comes from one source, the sense of the oneness of all, the interconnectedness of all, okay? That's what he called extrovertive. So again, just a highlight, some subtleties of differences in experiences. And then Zahner, he describes the three types of mysticism: nature, theistic, and monistic. Nature mysticism is where you experience yourself as being one with the universe. Theistic is when you experience yourself one with God. Excuse me. Where there's an awareness of God, but you still attain a sense of a self as separate from God, distinct from God, but yet in union with God. Okay, but there's still a sense of the self as separate from God. It's not equal to God or totally merges with God. The monistic is that sense of merging with God, a sense of identity with the divine. There's a loss of any distinction between the self and God. Okay, and that's R.C. Zahner. He was very influential way back then. Then Ninian Smart highlighted that he held there's basically two types of religious experiences, what he called numinous versus mystical. And a numinous experience is, he held as sort of a sense of encountering a holy other, sort of like, and here's a picture like Moses in the burning bush. That there's you, and then you just, whoa, this presence comes, this holy presence of a being greater than you and holy, and that evokes such a sense of awe and reverence, and from that, the sense of God, right? So it's more of a sense of a being apart from you that's divine that you encounter. That's the numinous experience. The mystical is a sense of just a union, a oneness with the universe, with nature, with reality, right? Is not so much God focused, right? Just a oneness with the cosmos, type of cosmic consciousness experience. Then Roger Schmidt kind of highlighted some aspects of different types of experiences, and again, I think it's way more complex than this, but that there are confirming experiences, or experiences that confirm your beliefs, saving experiences, more of a conversion experience into religion, where you feel that you've been brought into salvation in some way, and it just totally radically changes your life. Commissional is sort of an experience of your being called to a mission, where you feel you have a divine calling into something, and a mission to be completed that's given to you by a higher being. Possessional, just basically being possessed by a spirit. And then mystical, okay, some kind of an experience of union or oneness in some way. And then some psychologists that commented and offered theories in terms of understanding religion. Roland held that basically when people are saying they have this experience of oneness with the universe or with God, they're just really going back to the womb, and they're tapping into the experience a baby would have in the womb, of this sense of being in this ocean of oneness with the mother, that's what's really being evoked. And Freud held to that as well. And he added as well the idea that basically religious experiences are rooted in the human childlike desire, that we still want this daddy up in the sky who we can get the directions from as to how to live, right? To be guided by this being, and we will then obey the rules and the laws that he gives to us. Okay, so it's basically a projection of our parent in some way. Abraham Maslow broke away from this, and he held, no, there's something more profound going on. That people often, he called spiritual experiences often being peak experiences, where it's like, there's a moment that just captures a sense of being fully alive, and just a sense of deep meaning, and you're just really connecting with what matters, something of depth, something profound, something deeply meaningful. And with it, you just feel like, wow, this is it. This is what life is all about. And you're really in flow, connected. It's meaningful, powerful, and it's overwhelming in ways. He called them peak experiences. It's held like, it's sort of like you're almost living at the highest level that you can as a human being. Like you're just really feeling the best you could possibly feel as a human being. That's sort of what he implies by peak experience. And he implied that it had spiritual meaning, and it was kind of connected to spirituality. But in terms of the history, in terms of religious studies, a few key figures here that were very influential in understanding the nature of religious experience. Okay, just to highlight a few more names here is Friedrich Schleiermacher, back in who died in 1834. He, again, this is the time after just the Enlightenment has come about, and there's kind of a questioning of the basis of religion, right? That's developing at this time. And he advocated the idea that what's central to religion is that it's rooted in people having this experience of there being a higher power, a higher reality that we are dependent upon. And this feeling of absolute dependence. And from this, we develop the concept of a creator God, that I can't create this world. I really can't create myself. I can't create another living being. And there's just this sense of awe and experience in a deep way that there is a higher being that is the source of all that is. And that is the foundational essential experience that is the basis of religion and human religiosity. Okay. And I do think that is very right on. That is really the number one key thing. And from there, it all evolves and develops into more things, but that's a key thing. Then William James, often regarded as the father of modern day psychology. He wrote the book, The Varieties of Religious Experience, way back in the early 1900s at the turn of the century. And he became very influential, and his book is still widely read and used in the study of religion, especially in this topic area. If you major in this field, you'll probably end up reading his book, The Varieties of Religious Experience, at some point. That was based on surveys that was done, in the late 1800s. And so it did reflect predominantly more Christian experiences of experiencing the presence of God, love, forgiveness, and all that, and dramatic experiences that people had in various ways. Anyway, so he summed up that he held that the essence and the specific qualities associated with experiences that could be called religious or mystical is, number one, that they're hard to describe, they're ineffable. Okay, very difficult to describe. It's hard to find words. Why? Because it's such a different type of experience. There's a sense of it being of another order, another type of thing. It's not like your everyday experience, right? So it makes it difficult to describe. Secondly, is the noetic quality. The sense of knowing. It's like it's deep down in your core. The sense you just know that this is a spiritual experience, or you just know that this is God right now speaking to you, touching you, something or other going on there. You just know it. It's an inner knowing that's deep, almost you could say of the soul, right? Transiency. This is a key thing. These experiences are not permanent. They like come upon you, and they may last for some time, but then they start to fade. And then there's different kinds that can kind of come and go. They touch you, and you're encountering this other dimension, this other reality. It's not like you go in it and then you just stay in it. You can be aware of it all the time. You can develop the ability of tuning into and cultivating it more, but it's not like kaboom, you have this presence come upon you and it's permanently there to never ever change. It's not like that. They're transient in nature, okay? And then lastly, the passivity, in the sense that you don't totally have it under your control. It's not under your dictates. You can't just decree and demand, I want this experience here and now. Come on, God, deliver. It doesn't work that way. Yes, you can be ready. You can be on the path. You could be praying. You could be meditating. You can be doing these things, but you just never know when something will happen. Okay. It's not totally within your control. That's a key thing. However, you can purposely induce altered states, right? And that's why in those primal kind of traditions, if you want to use that term, they had all these techniques of inducing these states. But are they really qualitatively the same? Again, there's a variety of experiences to be had here, okay? So that's to keep that in mind. If they are purposely provoked, and by what means and in what kind of a way, and what does that actually mean when you enter into a bit of a trance? What kind of experience are you actually cultivating through that? How does it compare with the big picture of other types of experiences to be had? Okay, these are all big questions. Now I'm really kind of, giving you an overview. This is an area that is not studied enough, not talked about enough, not at all taught about. Nobody ever teaches anything in this area. So we're in kindergarten level here, folks, in our understanding of these things. Okay, so I'm just trying to highlight and point out to you the complexity of the topic here. It's huge. All right, and again, we're very ignorant in this whole arena. And then I just want to end here with Rudolf Otto. He's very influential in this area. And if you're in religious studies and majoring that officially as your field of study, chances are you will at some point read his book, The Idea of the Holy. Okay, there's a copy, of the book here, the title, The Idea of the Holy, an inquiry into the non-rational factor in the idea of the divine and its relation to the rational. And so, you can see his dates here. He died in 1937. professor in theology, traveled the world, had very much a strong interest in Eastern traditions, and he wrote this book in 1915. And he held, and this ties in with something I said way back in the beginning in the previous video. The essence of religious experience lies in the sense of fascination and attraction, along with a sense of awe and fear of something great. It's an encounter with the holy. And this is sort of what Ninian Smart based his idea on this about the numinous. And it is this sense that, and it's also a little bit tied in with Schleiermacher's idea of encounter, or just sensing a dependence, that there is something greater, bigger than us. Okay, I'm just gonna, there is a higher, greater being that is the source of all that is, right? And our sense of dependence on that. But at the same time, there's a sense of this being the holy other, a sense of reverence and awe that it owes your deepest respect and reverence. That this is a being that could just boom, zap you dead on the spot, all right? A being of immense power and greatness. So with that is a sense of attraction. You're fascinated, you're drawn and pulled in to want to know and connect with this being. But at the same time, there's a sense of reverence and fear and respect, because this is something, I don't know, so great, so holy. And that's the key essence. And he called it a mysterium tremendum et fascinans. Okay, it's this mysterious being of tremendous mystery and yet fascination. And so that's kind of the key essence of religious experience. And then in this work here, the idea of the holy, he held that we have a faculty of divination, he called it. We have a capacity, an inbuilt capacity for experiencing the holy, the divine, the spiritual, okay? And something that allows us to genuinely cognize, to understand, grasp, and recognize the holy when it shows up. Okay, when it appears, that we're able to conceive it, relate to it, and perceive it. Okay, well, perceive, conceive, and relate. I should put it in that order. So the numinous experience involves feelings, sensations, and perceptions that are qualitatively different from anything that we can have through our natural everyday sense perception. Okay, so you have your everyday senses, or even you think of your mother or your, some loved person that you love, like, a spouse, a partner, whatever, who knows, your children, and you just love them, and it's all lovey-dovey, you feel nice. But then if you get a divine visitation of divine love, is of another wholly different category of being. Yes, there might be a connection of a sense of love, but what this is totally other. It is different, qualitatively different. You may see things and hear things, all right, in terms of visions and hearing voices, but it's qualitatively different from what you normally see and hear in everyday conversation and life, right? Okay, that's a key thing, is that whatever these spiritual experiences are that you can have, there's something within you that is capable of perceiving them and being receptive to them, right? And also understanding and noting that they are of a different dimension. They're qualitatively different than what comes to us through our usual five senses. And that's the norm in this physical world of physical engagement. And that's what sets them apart as, quote, spiritual experiences. Okay, that's something really important. And I really think that's something that we need to work with here. Okay. Well, then, just to add to this, in more recent times, and this is the last slide here, is about some of the work of Andrew Newberg, what he calls neurotheology. And he's tried to do research in terms of brain research, where he would bring into the lab people who could induce spiritual religious experiences, various types, if they be monks who meditate or nuns who pray, and notice what goes on in the brain here. and that indeed there are certain parts of the brain that are activated during religious or spiritual experiences that people have. And so that's where there's been kind of a talk about the God part of the brain, which would support Otto's idea that we have the capacity, biologically, we're wired for God. Okay, and in fact, I'll be posting a little video where he talks about we are biologically wired to have spiritual experiences. Now, the thing is that there'll be some who say, aha, we finally explained away why it is people think they're having spiritual experiences. That if you, activate or stimulate this part of the brain, ooh, you're going to get these kind of senses and sensory experiences that you will then say, oh, you'll call them spiritual experiences. But really, it's just sort of a certain firing going on in the brain. So we now have a biological explanation for certain sense experiences that people have that they're calling spiritual experience, but really they're not. They're just biologically stimulated sensory experience. So we have explained it away, implying that there is no spiritual reality whatsoever behind people having spiritual experiences, okay? And so, but it's almost like saying, because we were able to locate and see how our, through the eye, our vision gets processed through the brain, and we've explained that, see, this is the part of the brain that can explain how I can see the buildings out there right now. Ta-da! Does that mean that those buildings don't exist? And we've now explained away why it is that I'm having a visionary experience of buildings? Not, of course it doesn't. Okay, so this is what goes on here. But anyways, this is some of the work of Newberg, just to highlight that. So these are some of the discussions that can go on out there in this area. And and it's just a little bit of an introduction here for you on the varieties of religious experience, some of the issues involved, and some of the theorists involved here. And there you go. All right.